Wolfman is a 2025 horror film directed by Leigh Whannel, who I would consider one of my favorite horror filmmakers as of late. I'd probably throw him in with the likes of Robert Eggers or Jordan Peele, in filmmakers that consistently are making interesting films that I personally enjoy. You know, there are always some, there's a degree of freedom in there, but by and large, all of those filmmakers make pretty quality films. Leigh Whannel most recently directed The Invisible Man, and so when The Wolfman was announced, or Wolfman, I should say, not they dropped the, I was pretty darn excited. Leigh Whannel started with writing Saw alongside his friend James Wan, and the two kind of went in very different directions, with James Wan kind of going for the bigger, grander, more epic stuff, started doing movies like The Conjuring, and then got his feet wet in like the DCEU, doing like Aquaman and things, which isn't really my speed. Whereas Leigh Whannel went for more of the subtle movies, although still had his own flair, of course. I thought Upgrade was maybe one of the best modern horror films with the AI angle. It's also got a lot of action to it. And The Invisible Man follows suit with a more high-tech kind of storyline, but very fast-paced and very creative and fun. So both of those movies are really solid, and I was really excited to see The Wolfman, I have to stop adding the. But it just feels right, And that is kind of indicative of what this movie is, because The Wolfman is the classic 40s monster movie with Lon Chaney Jr. Wolfman isn't really a remake of that movie. It is a fresh, modern story based on the concept of werewolfism, lycanthropy, whatever you'd like to call it. In this version, the werewolfism is a disease, an illness, and I think that's an interesting take on this kind of story. However, you are missing from the get-go a lot of the iconography that goes with the werewolf movie. Now, you can argue that this, stuff is kind of rinse and repeat. They do it a lot in a lot of movies, but it's sort of like a vampire movie not having the crucifixes and the holy water and, them rising out of the coffin, them drinking blood. Like, that's just what the vampires do. That's what those movies are. And so for a werewolf movie to not have the full moon, to not have, the hair growing all over and the fangs and, why is my mind drawing a blank of all the other stuff? Wolfbane and, it's just missing that werewolf stuff that you just kind of expect with a werewolf movie. But I understood that going into this movie, Leigh Whannel was taking a very different approach, and the werewolfism, the lycanthropy, was an illness. And I respected that idea because they've done tons of werewolf movies. Let's get something different on the screen. Leigh Whannel is one of my favorite filmmakers for a few reasons, but there are three that come to mind. One, he's very good at witty, creative dialogue. That also, two, adds to his sensibilities and his humor style, which kind of shine through with a lot of his characters, and I think that adds his own personal touch. And finally, a really important one is he has a lot of twists and turns in his stories. With The Invisible Man, and to an extent Upgrade, but it kind of was a little more apparent in Invisible Man, you can tell that he's a storyteller based more so on plot. The characters and the characterization and the depth there is not his priority. He's mostly about a very engaging story with a lot of twists and turns, a lot of fun beats. And that can be fun. They're great popcorn type of movies. But they're not super depthful. So when you have a movie like Wolfman, where it's basically The Fly, but instead of turning into a bug, he's turning into a dog, and you're stuck in a house with three characters, sort of like The Shining, I guess, you either have to have The Shining's level of gravitas and filmmaking and subtlety, or you have to have like Stephen King levels of characterization, where you really are feeling for these characters and there's a lot of depth to them. And the Wolfman doesn't have either. It actually doesn't have any of the three things that I talked about, because there are not many twists and turns in the movie. It's pretty straightforward. The guy starts to turn into a dog. It doesn't have the humor. It's a very dry movie. And there aren't a lot of words even spoken in the movie. It's close to being a silent film in many scenes. And that takes away the fun of the Leigh Whannel script, because that's one of the things I love about him, is his creativity and cleverness when it comes to characters and situations. Like, The Invisible Man did that really, really well. Despite not having a super depthful main character, it made up for it in terms of the fun and the gags. Wolfman only has one. He turns into a Wolfman. And it's cool, don't get me wrong, and there are good scenes within that. Actually, there are a few scenes that are quite frightening and very intense and very suspenseful, and, my heart was thumping in my chest, so kudos to those scenes, particularly the opening. There is an accident, to not get into too many spoilers, and there's something involving, like, bandages on an arm. All of those scenes were very well done and very suspenseful and very creepy. But a lot of the rest of it is a bit dull, because you don't really care about a lot of these characters. You're just kind of waiting to see where the werewolfism will go. And there's a lot of forced sentimentality, where the movie almost pauses one tone, and then, like, soft, sad piano music will play and be like, I love you so much, you're such a good mother. And then it goes back to, like, a dog man running around on all fours, and it is very tonally weird. It's not like a werewolf movie such as An American Werewolf in London, which might be my favorite werewolf movie, along with the original Wolfman, The Wolfman. But that movie, it adds the humor into it. So yes, there are tonal contrasts in the movie, but the humor allows it to kind of flow. This movie takes itself pretty darn seriously, and when there's a suspenseful scene, it works pretty well for what it's going for. But when those scenes are not present and you're just dealing with people in a house, it gets a little dull, gets a little repetitive. I also found the ending, despite, I guess having some kind of it's bringing it back full circle thing going on, to be a bit underwhelming. And I don't know, I guess it just was a bit disappointing. On my Letterboxd, which I recommend you follow because I do movie reviews, not just of new releases, but also older films that I watch or rewatch, I gave it a 3 out of 5, which would be, I guess, a 6 out of 10, which to me is it's like a C, maybe. It's like an average type of movie. And that's not bad. I'd say it's worth your time to see it for those creepy scenes alone. But it was disappointing because I expect so much from a filmmaker like Leigh Whannel. And I'm not, like, jumping off his bandwagon. I'll still be there for his next film. But I hope that he will continue doing what he's good at and not taking it so seriously. I feel like his last few movies had a bit of pulp to them and a bit of fun. Even the original Saw, say what you will about it, because it is a very intense movie, but it has its lighthearted moments. This movie felt almost too self-serious, too much about, like, generational trauma and scars and, family-born illnesses, which is fine to have in your movie. I'm not saying his other movies didn't have depth to them, because they did. But the focus was on the fun, and you could take away that afterward. When I'm just being, hammered in, like, life lessons that characters are speaking to one another, kind of takes the fun out of it, Especially for my werewolf movie, when I want to see a guy turn into a snarling beast and howl at the moon. And you get that a bit, but I don't know. Maybe not enough. I also felt like, with Blumhouse's name on it, there's kind of a leveling down. Yes, they're funding the movie, but Blumhouse has kind of been notorious for cheapo horror thrills of recent, and they have not left a good taste in my mouth. And then on top of that, you call it Wolfman, which invokes that original Wolfman movie, and there's basically nothing to tie it into that movie. I guess if you want to stretch it, he's going to visit his father's estate, which is what Larry Talbot does in the original, so you can make that connection if you want to. I don't know. It feels like mostly a marketing ploy. And I get he is a Wolfman, and I get that Wolfman is now synonymous with werewolf, but, you know, have a little respect for the Universal monsters, because this definitely was not that. One final thing, while the actors did a fine job and the main guy really sold it as, you know, turning into this werewolf, and I love when it had like the werewolf vision. I thought that was a nice touch, and, you know, him hearing things, and you get kind of that dog perception from him. But I felt like the mom character, his wife, and the daughter were kind of stock. I feel like there wasn't a lot to them. They were largely there to be like dangled, like, ooh, you can't kill them, that's the threat. And I just wish there was more to it, because they weren't the most likable characters, and I needed a little bit more from them. Started to go somewhere in a particular scene where they're driving to the dad's estate. I'm like, okay, I see some camaraderie here. And then there's a character introduced, and it kind of messes that up, which I get is to build suspense. But if you don't care about the characters that are in jeopardy, then you either need to give me like fun, random, crazy stuff or humor, or you need to give me more depth to these characters, or else I'm not going to care when they're in peril. And I didn't, largely. Except for the fact that obviously I don't want people to be killed by a werewolf, but, you know, this is a horror movie. I want to see something happen. So there you go. My review of Wolfman. Is it the worst thing ever? No. I suppose for a January horror release, you could do a lot worse. But at the same time, I expected more from Leigh Whannel, and I hope, you know, maybe he should just go back to doing original projects and not keep, you know, leeching off of these old characters. There you have it, everyone. Stay tuned for my next spooky review. And remember, for all things Halloween, this is Hauntformer.